This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. There's never been a better time to make good use of your kit, inspire others, make some extra cash, and make a difference. Sell your used kit today at mpb.com/sell and let someone else love it as much as you have. In this episode of the Photography News podcast, Will tests a rocket launcher, Roger gets his knees dirty, and Kingsley wages war on plants. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Photography News podcast. It is the 20th. We are getting older by the fortnight. My name is Roger Payne. I am the editorial director at Photography News. And in light of recent technology news, I thought I'd introduce my colleagues based on which one of them has managed to break their laptop in the last few days. So starting off with the editor of Photography News, Mr. Will Chung. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rog. How are we doing?
Very good.
Better than my laptop, by the sounds of it.
Your laptop appears to be working in some form, but please tell what has happened. How did it break?
Oh, it was a disaster. It was a freak accident, Rog. I was working on the sofa sitting on my lap. The doorbell went. I got up to answer the door. Obviously, I put the laptop on the floor in front of me, and as I stood up, a bunch of keys fell out of my pocket, hit the screen dead.
So the screen is completely kaput, is it?
It's completely. There's like like you get a bullet hole through glass.
Yeah.
Shattery look. I've got that. So I've had a quote for it. It's a MacBook Pro, just so you know. I've had a quote for it, and I've made an insurance claim for it. The insurance people have very kindly been in touch with me, and it looks like I can get it sorted minus the excess, which is fair enough. So it's been a disaster, but I managed to plug it into a monitor, so you can see me and it's working, but there's no image actually on the darn laptop.
Well, sorry to hear about that trouble, Will. I'm sure you'll get it fixed nice and quickly. But I must admit, when I heard that somebody had broken something on the podcast team, it was far more likely to be the other person. So I was quite surprised to hear that contributing editor Kingsley Singleton hasn't broken anything, or maybe he has. Kingsley, how are you?
Yeah, I'm unbroken, I think. Unbroken, unbowed, unbent. That's the Game of Thrones thing, isn't it? Can't remember which house it's from. Yeah, but actually, with sort of impending irony, if there is such a thing, I was saying to Will after he told me about his mishap that I can see within visual range in my office here, 2 screen protectors, no, in fact 3 screen protectors that I've bought for different devices, all of which are merrily sitting in their packaging waiting to be applied, and have been for the last 3 weeks. So like as if I needed a portent to make me kind of. The trouble with applying those things is I find it's just one of those little jobs that I don't really like doing, because I find it a little bit fiddly and a little bit sort of exacting, and there's always that sort of that tension that you're going to end up with a nasty air bubble, and it's all going to be
or some spaniel fluff, presumably trapped behind it in the corner. Well, we shall wait with bated breath to see whether or not your laptop makes it through the podcast, and hopefully you'll manage to install your screen protector in due course. So moving on quickly. As we always start a podcast, we thought we'd chat a little bit about what we've been photographing of late. We're hot on the heels of the announcement from Boris yesterday about the beginning of the easing of the lockdown. The days are getting a little bit longer. It's a bit lighter in the morning when I'm going out on my dog walks, and it's staying a little bit lighter in the evening too. So very positive from a photographic perspective. So which is why, presumably, Kingsley, you've done absolutely nothing. Is that
right? Well, you are in fact absolutely right. I haven't been out and taken any pictures for what seems like a long time. But I've got some top Instagram news though. I've actually I can officially announce that I have passed 290,000 followers on Instagram. At least that's what I thought it said. I didn't have my glasses on. I'm not sure the number is exactly correct.
What is the actual number? Is it just 290?
I believe it's 292. Yeah. But
just
they're all real.
A few zeros off the end.
They're all living, breathing people.
So I'm not entirely sure that we should allow you on a podcast without having, if you've not actually taken any pictures in the last couple of weeks. So surely you must have been doing something photographic.
Yes, I've been creating pictures. Basically, I've been doing that lockdown thing of kind of doing a bit of I don't know what you would call it, surfing through your back catalogue. But if there's I'm not sure what sort of verb that we can apply to that. But I've been looking at old landscapes because I can't go out landscaping at the moment, and I've been finding them and sort of seeing which ones that I can kind of crop into panoramas, which ones kind of suit that. Which clearly I mistakenly didn't take at the time of. So, but actually, there's kind of more. I mean, there are some that I kind of found that I had shot and forgotten about, that I'd shot properly, separate frames, and I'd actually forgotten to make into panos. So that was kind of quite a nice discovery. And I suppose it's probably true of most photographers who kind of shoot more than they use, insofar as you can quite often kind of dig down a few folders and find some things that you had intended to make something of.
So as you've been pilfering your way through your back catalogue, have you found that you've shot stuff where you've shot multiple frames that you meant to stack together, or are you looking at it now through the eyes of, I'm just looking at single frames that I can crop to panorama style?
Well, a bit of both. Like, there were some shots that I did when I was on Anglesey a couple of years ago, which were kind of, surprisingly enough, long lens pictures across I can't remember what the stretch of water is called.
Menai Straits.
Menai Straits. Oh, yeah. It seems like I could remember. So, but these were kind of, there was some nice light on Snowdonia, and there's like sort of a car, I can't remember the name, like sort of Bognor Castle or something in the foreground, and so I did that, and I found those and I put those together. But actually, yeah, the kind of the opposite side of that as well. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. There was one. There was a picture that I'd taken that was a vertical composition that I took in Wadi Rum in Jordan, and I was never that satisfied with it because the foreground wasn't particularly good. But looking at it again, I realised there were all these nice kind of recessions in the distance. It was like it was dawn in the desert, and so there's all this kind of like pink light and stuff, and these cliff faces, which actually ties in rather nicely with the kind of the recent landing on Mars, because that's where they shot The Martian, the Ridley Scott movie, Wadi Rum. Anyway.
Oh, is that right?
That's
there we go.
So anyway, yeah. So basically, like it's pictures like that. It's kind of, and obviously you're looking at things that will work, and the reasons why they might work in panoramic, a panoramic format. And one of the reasons this, I think, worked was because there was a sort of a dirt track, or like a track that had been used by Jeeps that was snaking just into the right place, and it meant that once I'd cropped it down, it kind of worked fairly well.
Well, I'm sure that your 292,000 followers on Instagram will look forward to seeing the results of your cropping exploits. And just from a geographical perspective, I'm not sure it's Bognor Castle. I think it's Bangor, isn't it?
Is it what?
Is it Bangor up there? I don't know.
I think it's from Carnarvon Castle you might have been thinking about.
I'm on the wrong coast.
Yeah, I think Bognor's down on the south coast, isn't it? Anyway, there we go. Let's not get into the geographical detail. So, Will, I believe Kingsley mentioned there he's been shooting with long lenses, which we know is his trait. But I understand you also have been enjoying a bit of long lens action over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I've been using two lenses from Canon, been testing them. They're the 600 f11, which I'm holding up, which I know listeners can't appreciate that, but I'm just holding in front of the boys now, and the 800 f11. And I was quite surprised when they announced them a while ago. They launched these at the same time as the EOS, the R5 and the R6. And I was a little skeptical when they launched them, because I thought f11 lens, they'll never work, they'll never catch on. Because you guys, probably like me, used to use mirror lenses in the days of film, when they were f8 or f11 fixed aperture, and they were challenging to use, probably mildly, because of course you didn't have in those days the ability to go up and down the ISO like you can nowadays on a modern digital camera. So those fixed aperture lenses were a real difficult thing to use. But I've been using these now for a couple of weeks, and I must admit they're wonderful, really good.
So they're I mean, looking at them, you wave them in front of us there. They are remarkably small considering their focal length. So, but they're not mirror lenses. Is that correct?
Yeah, these use Canon DO, which is diffraction optics technology, which is why they're so compact. In the form that I'm showing you now, it's when they're retracted. So they do extend by about 7 centimeters.
Right.
So when you travel with them, obviously you collapse them down. When you want them to use, you have to extend and then lock, and then you're good to go. So this is the 100mm I'm using in front, and it only weighs just over a kilo. So it's not too bad. The 600mm weighs under a kilo, and this is really hand holdable. They've both got image stabilizers on them, so you can hand hold for quite a while. They are comfortable to use. And the optical quality is very, very good.
There's a certain rocket launcher aesthetic to the way that you just sort of slightly extended it out there.
I was going to ask what the AF performance was like, because without giving away the plot of the next issue of PN, but given that they're kind of what did you say they were, F8 and F11?
No, they're both F11.
Yeah.
But the latest EOS cameras, the R5 and the R6, they will focus each lens, no problem. In fact, although I haven't got them to try, you can add the teleconverters to these lenses. So effectively, you get an f22, for instance, in the case of the 100mm, you get an f22 1600mm lens, and it even autofocuses with that aperture. So I haven't tried that, but certainly with the f11, the AF is very, very good. And I'm sure I won't give everything away. I'm enthusiastic about it for sure. But you get a reduced AF zone in the camera. It's only about, let's say, about 20mm across in a square. And the face detect works really well on it. And while I've been photographing, I was down with my partner Annie last weekend for Valentine's, and I was standing in the garden. I spent a lot of the time in the garden, actually, in the freezing cold of these things. And I had the auto ISO on the camera, and I was shooting merrily with them in quite poor light. The auto ISO is taken care of, and the focusing is really crisp. And I photographed pigeons, some robins, even had a grey squirrel came into the garden, a fox, parakeets. And the eye focus, I'm not saying they're infallible, but the eye focus is generally very, very good. I'm enthusiastic about these darn lenses. I think other manufacturers should take note.
And what sort of money are they, Will? I mean, presumably they are substantially cheaper than going out and investing in a 600mm Canon lens, which has got variable aperture.
Yeah, if you buy a 600mm Canon, I think the f4 is about 13 grand, but you can buy the 600mm f11 at £749. Although I will say, if you want the lens hood, that's an extra £59. The 800mm lens is just under £1,000.
Right.
Again, you need to spend an extra 59 quid on the lens hood, which I thought Canon's a bit cheeky to do that. But anyway, that's another story. But they're really good value. And if you, I'm not a telephoto addict like Kingsley, but if you sort of buy it for the occasional air show or a bit of astro or a bit of wildlife photography, £1,000 is not outrageous. I mean, it obviously still a great deal of money, but it's not outrageous for what you get.
I was going to say, these look right up your street, Kingsley. If only you'd invested in a Canon system as opposed to Nikon.
I'm sure there's some sort of mount converter that I can.
Well, I've been certainly not wandering around with long telephoto lenses, and I've made the most of the fact that the spring weather seemed to have warmed the ground up, and all of a sudden the local churchyard to me just burst into colour. Well, actually, more specifically one colour, in that there were a whole load of snowdrops that came out. And so I thought, well, there we go, perfect opportunities to go out and grab some pictures of the snowdrops, because they're not around for long, and they can get quite battered by the winds that are around at the moment. So I've spent a fair few minutes and over the last couple of days just on my knees taking pictures of snowdrops, which has been very therapeutic, I must say. So I will obviously share those with my far less than 292,000 followers on Instagram when I get round to it. But interestingly, I managed to do the images. I managed to temporarily acquire a GFX 50S. Now we obviously talked on the last podcast about the GFX 100S. But I've been using a GFX 50S, which is very useful for that type of stuff, because it's got the flip-up screen, which obviously my usual camera, the X100S, doesn't have. So that's been very useful. But we are going to go into photographing flowers a little bit more in the main body of this podcast. So before we move on to that, Will, you mentioned there about the next issue of the magazine. It's going to be quite a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, this is our big spring issue. I mean, in normal years, and of course this is not a normal time, but we have a big issue leading up to the photography show at the NEC, which of course isn't taking place this spring. I know there's a virtual show in March, and the actual show, hopefully, God willing, that will happen in September. But this is the issue that, anyway, normally, traditionally, is out of the photography show. So it's a bit of a bumper issue. We've got the results of our awards, where readers voted for what they consider the best product or the best services. So all the results will be in there in a big splash, which it looks really fab, actually, and some fantastic winners amongst them. And a usual raft of tests, of course. And we've got amongst those these kind of lenses I've mentioned, a Laowa macro lens, that's difficult to say, and some of the pictures from the winning pictures from the Travel Photographer of the Year, which I know again last year was difficult for travel, but there's some awesome work there to enjoy and get inspired by for when we get traveling again.
So loads of pictures, some great kit, and the issue is out when, Will? Early March?
Yeah, from the 9th of March.
9th of March it is. Obviously, if you're unable to get a hold of a copy of the magazine, you can still read it for free online, which is at our website, which is photographynews.co.uk. We'll also obviously be sending out updates on our social media streams, and the handle for Instagram, Facebook and Twitter is all at Photo News PN. As I already alluded to earlier, we thought that we would talk a little more about flowers, spring flowers specifically. The warmer weather has definitely warmed everything up a bit, and as I said, I'd seen a lot of floral action going on around the area where I live. So perfect time to get out and take some pictures of those very photogenic subjects. So we thought we'd start, didn't we, gents, with how you would tackle these things outdoors. And Kingsley, normally I know you'd be sat in your car trying to photograph them with the window wound down, but if you were actually to make an effort, what sort of time of day would you be out?
I think, but for me, I guess it's less. I feel like it's less important in some ways than like a wider landscape. I mean, I'm considering this as being, both kind of like, macro shots, sort of floral portraits, but also making use, if you can find them, as like a foreground to a village scene, a town scene, something like that. So it's more about kind of where the light is falling, I think. So like typically, I think for me anyway, if I'm doing a close-up, I would hope that the flower was in some level of shade, even if it's bright behind. I mean, that can work kind of quite nicely if you've got a kind of a shaded subject and a slightly lighter backdrop. You can get a little bit of backlighting in there, but certainly not in direct sun for flowers, I wouldn't say.
So let's assume then that our listeners have gone out and the only flowers that they can see are in direct sunlight. Is there any way of getting around that problem?
I just kick them all down, rip them out, stick them in somewhere else. No, I think, well, I mean, the good old, most people, when they buy a 5-in-1 reflector or a reflector for portraits, a lot of those actually come with a diffuser as either in the center kind of part of it or as a kind of a cover. No, it is the center, isn't it? It is the center of it. And what you can do is you can position one of those to keep the flower in shade, or you can make something yourself. Just a bit of cardboard. It kind of depends how closely you're framing this subject, and I suppose also how you're setting up the camera. Insofar as if you're shooting from a tripod, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of position a diffuser that's sort of in the way of the sun to keep it in shade, and the advantage of the shade is really just about kind of trying to control the contrast, because otherwise you get sort of some well, again, this is the kind of personal preference thing. It'd be interesting to see what you guys thought of it, but like I prefer it to be quite low contrast on things like flowers, because I kind of want them to look subtle and pretty in that way, but I can accept that people might want higher contrast.
What about you, Will? Are you a low contrast guy when it comes to shooting your flowers outdoors?
Well, I'm happy with both approaches, and shooting in the shade is a very good thing. And I've in a situation before in the past, I've had just somebody might have been with just standing in the way, to provide shade, and that's a good way of working. But I like the wider views as well. When there's you go to the local park and there's a whole a whole spread of daffodils in front of you, and I like getting the wide angle out. And in those situations, especially if it's sunny and bright, I just get the polarizer on it and saturate those colours a bit more. I quite like that approach.
Now, one of the problems I had when I was photographing my snowdrops is there were a couple of aborted attempts that I made because it was just too damn windy. So, I mean, I suppose you can start to sort of take bits of cardboard with you and tuck bits of cardboard under your arm, or, try to find some kind of shelter. But I mean, do you guys have any sort of thoughts about what you can do to actually get rid of the wind, Kingsley?
I mean, yeah, if it's windy, I'll just kick all the flowers over, rip them up. No, I mean, I think that's you can tackle that to an extent with shutter speed. I mean, if it's blowing a real gale, you might as well just accept that you're going to have to come back another time. But certainly using slightly faster shutter speeds is going to kind of cut out a little bit of that subject movement if it's just a sort of a gentle breeze. And most of the time, if you're treating them as kind of floral portraits, you're going to have quite a fast shutter speed because you'll probably be using quite a wide aperture.
Yeah, fair point. I think the issue that I had was more focusing, in terms of you'd get it sort of framed up just as you liked it, and you'd have the relatively shallow depth of field, and it would all be nicely blurred out behind, and then all of a sudden a gust of wind, and then the bit that you're actually focusing on would then disappear from the frame.
Yeah, I mean, if you want that, I guess, again, so it depends what you want. If you're trying to get quite a bit of separation to it, then it can help to shock horror, use a longer lens, move back a bit and shoot with. So like, say you're, close up, you've got like a, I don't know, 85-1.8 or something, and you're using it wide open, you're not going to get much depth of field. But if you kind of go back a bit, use a longer focal length, and then use an aperture like f5.6 or something, then you'll still get some separation, but the actual depth of field will be comparatively greater. So a little bit of, I mean, again, it's like, what I think what you're talking about is the trouble you run into when you're shooting macro, isn't it? Where like even the slightest kind of movement is just enough to kind of throw it off.
Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, I guess I am. So Will, presumably in terms of, I was photographing again down from ground level. Now, presumably you would advocate that is the best way to go when you're photographing, the spring flowers, rather than sort of photographing them from above, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, I'll try and get below them so I'm looking up, or at least the same level. And just on the wind issue, some of it is just being prepared. And a lot of people, professional nature photographers, use this thing called a plamp, which is made by Wimberley, and that's like an adjustable arm with a clip at both ends. You can actually then hold the plant if it's just one individual bloom you're going for. But if you don't want to spend money on those, just take one like bamboo cane and some string or some fishing line, and you can hold individual plants quite steady by just being a bit creative. It's a bit fiddly, you may not want to do it, which is fine. And of course, the other thing, if it is blowing a wind, just blowing a gale, just use it creatively. And let's go for some deliberate camera movement here, or intentional camera movement, depending which acronym you prefer to use. But go for a bit of blur. And you might want to do, some dragscapes with these coloured flowers as well, where you do start, you pan across the scene. You start the shutter going with quite a long shutter speed, and as you go across the subject, your camera is basically moving. So these drag landscapes can work really well with some bright colour. Like I like doing it with daffodils, for instance. So you get some nice abstracts. And the key is basically, well, for me, the way I like to work is make sure the camera is moving before you get to where your subject is, and the shutter's already open, and then you get a smooth pan across your subject. So
the same technique as you would use if you were panning a moving, vehicle or person or something like that. So you're sort of moving, and then you're pressing the shutter and then continuing the movement to complete it.
And it does take a bit of practice to get it right, because every effect is different. The speed you pan, the shutter speed you use, the type of subject you got, whether you can pan straight or not. So they all have an impact. And of course, there are other ways of doing it. You can try things like multiple exposures and twist the camera around as you do each exposure. I know some people call them twisters, so they can be fun too. Obviously, it depends how many exposures your camera lets you do on the single frame. But certainly on Nikon, I think you can do 10 or something. and so you get some really cool effects. But certainly in terms of viewpoint, Rog, I like to try to get the same level or lower down, and I like doing funky things if I can. And if you can go out with a watering can, for instance, and it's sunny, I've kind of made myself like a shower, if you like, onto the flowers, onto the daffs, with some backlit sun, or even if you've got a flash, you can take with you. Use a flash behind the watering can. If you've got somebody to do all this, help some of this, hold this stuff around while you do it, you get some interesting effects.
Now, this does bring us on to a probably quite a contentious point when it comes to general gardening. Now, Kingsley, I'm assuming you're not a general fan of gardening per se, but what about gardening when it comes to making your images look better?
If you're going for a floral portrait or a macro shot, I think it's vital to do that kind of stuff. I mean, wider scenes, maybe it's less of an issue, but yeah, like if you're just kind of snipping a few sort of stray leaves or stalks or something else that's getting in the way is kind of, I think that's kind of permissible. And that kind of reminds me of something else I was going to say about trying to make those kind of pictures look a little bit more vibrant and sort of filling the frame. Something you can do is don't sort of automatically pick the plant that's closest to you. Try and sort of shoot through an arrangement of other leaves and petals and things, and that'll give you a sort of a nice, perhaps a nicer composition where you're kind of framing it within. People quite often think about depth of field as like a blurred background, but you can work with a blurred foreground in those kind of cases, and it can look quite pretty.
And I think the other thing on that as well is that you can sometimes see people who've done really good technique in terms of doing that, where they're shooting through a bunch and they've picked out a single bloom, but then that individual bloom or group of flowers are actually damaged, or they've got a big, they've got a bit of a bit of leaf stuck to them or something like that, and so it's almost like you're concentrating so much on just getting the framing right that actually you're not looking at the subject. I've certainly been guilty of that in the past, and I presume you chaps have as well.
No.
Just to say on the gardening, I'm a bit of a fan of gardening, and certainly last autumn when I did some fungi, tweezers were very, very useful in the camera bag, I have to say. And obviously we're not talking anything quite so small, but I think gardening is very much a good thing if you can tidy up your picture. I'm not suggesting one cheats and relocates things or anything like that, but I'm just talking about tidying up composition. And to be fair, that also applies to a landscape. If you're doing a scene and there's a crisp bag in the foreground, of course, if it's accessible, you can go tidy up, aren't you?
Now, this sounds like, Will, that not only have you got your gadget bag full of stuff, you're also carrying a watering can, some secateurs, a plamp, and various other items. So it sounds like you're going to be jangling your way along to be able to photograph these flowers.
It's actually true. My car boot is full of things like this, just in case.
Which I believe Kingsley can actually stand testament to.
Yeah, it's like Will's car's like Inspector Gadget's car, if anyone remembers him.
Well, okay, so what about, that's outdoors, so some really good advice there. Obviously, if at this time of year, the chances are that the wind can get up or rain can stop play, but you can still go out and let's say we'll buy the plants. We're not going to start nicking them out of their natural habitat. So if you went and bought some tulips or bought some daffs or whatever, you could photograph them at home. Now, Will, I'm sure I know you've done this in the past numerous times. So where do you start in terms of things like, taking plants home and then arranging them and then deciding, how you're going to light them? What's the starting point in your process there?
Well, I've been doing a lot of things on using a light pad recently, which is one of these LED lights. They're A4 or A3 or A2, depending which one you buy. They're not hideously expensive, but apparently architects use them to do tracings and artists use them for the same reason. But these light pads are really good fun. They're really thin. And what I've been doing recently, just laying the flowers on top. I have my camera set looking straight down onto it, and just basically moving plants within that scenario. And I've done things like, I've just been taking the petals off, for instance. And so, I take them home, do a few shots with these flowers on the light pad with another light above. I use an LED continuous lamp with an adjustable color temperature, not hideously expensive. and obviously people use them for video, but I use them for stills as well. So the plants I'm shooting are then backlit and also frontally lit. So I do some straightforward still life with the flowers, and then I get drastic and start pulling the petals off.
I'm much more basic than that in terms of I'll just go with window light in terms of, and one of the things that I did do a few years ago now was I just stuck a big bit of tracing paper over a window, and that was effectively my background. And then just lit it with a reflector in the foreground. So I mean, it's you don't have to invest in some lighting kit to necessarily be able to light them quite well. And it does, you have to position the flowers quite close to a window, because even though if you've got a really big window, you do still need to get pretty close, don't you? Kingsley, are you a window light kind of guy, or are you more likely to light your stuff some other way?
What I was thinking of when you were saying that was almost like not putting the flower in front of the window, but like almost like using the window light in the same way as you would if you were doing a window lit portrait. So you'd get kind of like a bit of contrast. And like for some, like I don't know whether that works quite so well for things like spring flowers, which are kind of, sort of routinely, you kind of think of them as fresh and colourful and stuff, or whether it's more of a, the sort of thing that you might do on something a bit more, I don't know, like an orchid or I don't know, something a bit more fancy. Like clearly I'm running out of plant names. I know all the plant names. I love all the plants. Yeah, I mean, I think like that again, like we've said sort of numerous times, the idea of setting one of these things up it's sort of a voyage of discovery, because you are then looking at lighting, looking at composition, and looking at like particularly things like if you're going for an arty kind of a very sort of considered looking composition, you can spend hours just turning single flower and stem in a vase just to get it just kind of curving the right way,
Just one thing, Roger. I mean, you mentioned things like daylight, but when I was doing some of this stuff late last year, my time of inspiration was late at night, so daylight was not an option. And actually, I did a little secret in terms of what I did at Christmas for Annie. I created my own Christmas card for her, and I started by just photographing some flowers, and then I was messing about with petals. I thought this might be interesting if I produced my own alphabet using flower petals, and my Christmas card, Merry Christmas, Annie, and the letters were created from petals, which I created. This is after about 15 vodkas, I think, late at night. So that's why, what you're saying is absolutely right. Nothing wrong with daylight, but often, especially this time of year, you don't have any choice but shoot at night time. So hence you have to supply your own light.
And remarkably, Will, she was still with you at Valentine's Day.
I know. God knows how.
Gosh, she's a keeper.
This is the thing with
escape. That was the main thing.
I was going to say with fictitious women, they do hang around, like Instagram followers who are also made up. I kid. I've met Annie. She's lovely. The other thing I was going to mention was like in the same way as you might use flowers within a wider composition in a town or a landscape, you can actually use them within a room to sort of be a focal point. So say you've got like a nice room at home, or with a bit of light coming in the window, you can sort of work to shoot something a little bit wider, and like almost thinking about things like those kind of old masters kind of still lifes where you'd have like a table with some some cutlery and a Twix on it or something, and something nice, something like a floral thing in a nice jug, with some you know what I mean, you know what I'm getting at here. It's a sort of a wider composition. It's not something that's all about the plant. It's at that point you're kind of maybe you're going for like the kind of the daffodils, and and it's a dark room, and the daffodils are just going to because actually that color then, if they're lit correctly, that color will start to bounce around and kind of appear in other parts of the room, and it can be quite sort of cheery.
Given your encyclopedic knowledge of plant names, Kingsley, I wonder what plant would go best with a Twix.
I don't know. It's just the cup of tea plant. I don't know.
Yeah, of course, not native to these shores, I don't believe, but a very sought after plant all the same. I mean, I think the point that you're making broadly is the fact that experimentation is what it's all about when you're photographing indoors. And I do recall actually something which I will share with my significantly fewer Instagram followers than Kingsley, and that is I was once doing a shot of some tulips using my tracing paper background, and I couldn't get the camera to focus, and the lens just constantly was just hunting. And in the end, I just took a picture with it hunting, and actually it looked really good. And so actually just having, and then I took this whole series of pictures of out of focus daffodils and tulips, which I stuck together as a triptych, and they look great.
And a technique that you've been using in every photo you've taken ever since.
I'll line them up for you, Kingsley. You knock them down. Well, there we go. Hopefully some good advice. I'm sure you can have a bit of fun going out and either groveling around on your hands and knees like I was to try and shoot some flowers at ground level, or do something slightly more sedate at home. So either, hopefully we've given you some good tips and advice there. This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. Use their free online valuation tool to instantly find out exactly how much your gear is worth. Get super fast payments straight into your bank account, and if you change your mind at any point up until you get paid, they'll ship it back for free. Time to answer a few reader questions. As this is a MPB supported podcast, we'll send the first one over to our esteemed colleagues at MPB. And the first question comes from a lady called Holly Cork, who's in Harlow, and she says, I'm keen to try and get some better close-up images of spring flowers. Handy that. So I'd like to invest in a macro lens. I have a Nikon D7500. Can you advise on some suitable options for me, either Nikon or otherwise? So here's what the guys at MPB had to say about that.
Great question, and we do have a couple of options for you, Holly. The first one is starting at the lower price point. It's the Nikon AFS 40mm f2.8G micro. It sells for £189 in excellent condition, and it's a great lens for crop sensor bodies like your D7500. The 40mm is great because it is a bona fide macro lens, but due to its 40mm focal length, it can be used for more standard applications, such as a everyday lens, and even a short portrait lens, which will be about 60mm equivalents on a crop sensor body. The one shortcoming of using it as a macro lens is that because of the shorter focal length, you do have to get quite close to your subject, be it a flower or an insect, for example, to actually get the macro capabilities, which means that you could potentially be blocking or covering the light that's falling on your subject. So for that reason, we're recommending another lens as well. It's a little bit more expensive. It's $499 in excellent condition, and it's the Nikon 105 f2.8 VR micro. It's a legendary lens in the Nikon lineup. It has VR, which is a vibration reduction, which will help you in keeping your shots steady, especially when you're maybe running lower shutter speeds. It's a fantastic lens as well that can double up as a slightly longer portrait lens. On your camera, it would be roughly about 140-150mm lens, I would say. But this lens is a bit of a legend in the Nikon lineup. It is incredibly sharp, as a lot of the micro lenses are. But this one truly is an exceptional lens. And the slightly longer length of the lens will allow you to kind of step a bit further back and not block the light that is falling on your subject. So I would say those two, the 40mm and the 105, would be our top picks.
Good answer there. Hopefully that's been useful for you, Holly. So a couple of questions for us to get our teeth into, gents. First one comes from Bryn in Holyhead. He could probably talk about your Menai Straits, Kingsley. He'll put us right. Come on, Bryn, let us know. Bryn said, I enjoyed the latest podcast on the Fujifilm GFX 100S and Sony A1. I just wish I had the money to spend on either of them. I am interested, however, in the Fujifilm X-E4, which was also announced at the same time as the GFX 100S, of course. Could the team give me their thoughts on that model? Now, I'll go first very quickly on this before I throw it out to these two. For me, the X-E range is the best thing about the Fujifilm range. I love the X-E range. I know it's not probably quite so loved as by everybody else, but I think the XE range is absolutely perfection in the camera in terms of the fact that it's just got all the bits that I need. I know that's a very personal thing. It's got it's got an EVF. It's got the same sensor, obviously, as you'll find in XT4 and all the other latest cameras. I'm not so sure, if I'm honest, about the fully tilting LCD on this particular one. I like a little bit of tilting, doesn't need to be 180 degrees. But for me, great little camera, really looking forward to getting my hands on it. And I am quite seriously thinking about actually investing in one. But Will, you were on the press announcement about it. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, the rumour mill had been grinding about it anyway, Rog, and I was looking forward to seeing what it offered, because I'm a huge fan also of the XE series, and I have bought an XE3 in the past, and in fact the XE3 is my go-to street camera, especially when combined with the 18mm f2 lens, and I think it's brilliant. And so the XE4, when it comes out, I will be at the head of the queue as well. And having a viewfinder I can lift up and shoot waist level is even better, because of course in XE3 the viewfinder was fixed, sorry, the monitor was fixed, so you couldn't angle it up. But now I've got a monitor that can. The EF is meant to be quicker and more sensitive. The face detect is meant to be better and quicker. The sensor is obviously better, as you mentioned, Rog, with from the XT4. So for me, the XE4 could be the perfect street camera, and I agree with you. I'm definitely up for buying one.
No, I think the point you make there, Will, is actually quite important for Bryn to consider, and that is that this is not a camera for necessary for all comings, is it? For all things, it just suits. I think it suits the type of photography I like to do, which is generally wandering around with a small camera that's nice and light. You obviously like to shoot it use it to shoot street. But if Bryn is shooting something like, I don't know, sports and action or other things of that nature, it's perhaps not the right camera. What would you say?
No, I think it's a very versatile camera. I use the XE series for street, but also, for instance, when I went to Venice 2 years ago now, I took an outfit with me. I had the 55-200 zoom and did scenes, and with that I had the 10-24, did sweeping scenics. Yeah, sure, it's not ideal for fast-paced action, but in terms of everything else, I think it's a lovely little camera, and it's small as well, and it's light. If you're into video, it's got 4K. It's got so many good things about it that I think it's a good all-rounder. So I wouldn't knock it for that, Rog. I actually think it's perfect for street, but it's also very good in many other areas too.
Fantastic. Kingsley, anything to add?
I guess I'll start by apologising to Bryn, naturally, and all his countrymen for my geography, and then I'd go on to say that, like you two, I've got some very pleasant memories of the XE series. I took one to Ukraine. I had a blast with it. It was great. I mean, it is sort of the kind of the literal benefit of all those things that you read about smaller cameras, letting you do a bit more. Carrying a smaller bag, carrying less weight and stuff. And I mean, I haven't used the new model, and in fact, I haven't used one since the original one. But I don't think that's changed. I don't think those benefits of form factor have changed. And if you look at the kind of the spec of this one, it's very much kind of in line with that idea of technology sort of trickling down, because like the innards of this camera are, barring a few things, pretty similar to like the XT4 and the XS10. I mean, I think the main thing it doesn't have is the in-body image stabilization. So like that's one thing to consider. Like if that's a game changer for someone like Bryn, then that's perhaps you look for one of the other models. But yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned sport. Like it'll do 20 frames a second. I mean, that's unreal, isn't it, for a tiny little camera? Like it weighs like 370 grams or something.
I suppose I was thinking more from the general handling of it, because it's not got a grip on it like the XS10 or the XT4, and it's got an offset viewfinder, and I'm not sure what the refresh rate is like on the viewfinder as well. So I'm not sure if it's like built for speed necessarily, but absolutely agree with everything you say there, and I think you're absolutely right about it not having IBIS. But if that is not important to you, Bryn, I think it's 3 thumbs up from the team here, and in fact it sounds like 2 of us might actually even go out and buy one. So so cracking little camera, really good price as well, and actually the 27mm that they also launched at the same time now with weather resistance. Looks like a great little lens to go with it, which I believe Fujifilm are going to be bundling those two together as a special deal. So maybe go out and consider that. Okay, good stuff. Moving on. Now, this is an interesting one. Comes from Stephen C. He emailed this into us, and he said, I've decided to treat myself to a new monitor for my PC, and I'm after a good one for photo editing. Does the team have any advice on features I should look out for and any recommended models? Kingsley.
I'm not an expert on monitors, so but I think it's
Will.
But I think so. Like I know I don't have a recommended model, but I think there are things that you need that where you can start to kind of like whittle down the sort of the forest of models that you kind of look at. And to be honest, like when I recently bought a monitor, I found it reasonably confusing because there are so many things doing what sound like very similar things. But I mean, I think the most important things are, how much sort of real estate do you want for your desktop? Do you find that you are kind of struggling to kind of fit all your windows in? In that case, get like a 32-inch or higher. If you want something a bit more modest, then like I got one recently. I bought like a Dell Ultra Sharp 25, and that's just a 25-inch monitor, but it's got a QHD resolution, so it's like 1440p, so it's a bit higher than full HD, a bit smaller than 4K, and like it's perfect for what I need. I just plug it into my laptop and use it when I'm sitting at the desk. And it's got kind of, I mean, there are other things you could look at, like in terms of technical things, like the contrast ratio. Mine's 1000:1, and I think that's sort of where you'd want to start for kind of photo editing. But like handling things as well, and the kind of the types of connections that it has, that's all important, because you something you don't want to do is necessarily sort of start replacing all your accessories. So you want to make sure it's got the right kind of ports for the things that you want to plug into it. And even things like this is a little bit tricky because you can't kind of go and look at one, but checking the stability of it, and kind of looking for that. If you're looking at reviews online, look for comments about the stability of it, because you don't want it wobbling around, and you want things like the ability to change the height by quite some degree to sort of suit the your own kind of your own seating position. So I'm running out of stuff to say, Rog. So
well, no, I think considering you don't know a lot about monitors, I think you've given a pretty good answer there. But as we discovered when we were chatting prior to hitting the record button for this podcast, we discovered that Will is the veritable Jean-Michel Jarre of monitors. In terms of, I believe you have 4 separate monitors. Will, explain yourself.
Roger, you're absolutely right. You had a wild stab in the dark, and you guessed I had 4. But by no means am I an expert on monitors. And normally, of course, this time of year, if somebody said to me, I'm looking for a monitor, what do you suggest? I would normally say, go to the NEC at Birmingham and see all these monitors on show, the NEC at the photography show. Can't do that this year. But nevertheless, sorry, the premise of that being, in the same way when you buy a TV, I personally wouldn't buy it online. I would go check out the screens in person. So that's what I was thinking of there. But I do have 4 monitors, Rog. I've got one Apple Mac 24-inch, which you prefer is getting quite old. And I've got 3 BenQ monitors. I've got 2 27-inch and 1 32-inch. And generally speaking, in my photographic life, I've often had 2 monitors working side by side. So I have one with, let's say, a Word document, an email, whatever it might be on one side, or if I'm working in Photoshop, my tool palettes on one side, and then the image on the other. So it just gives you a chance to work. So my standard working setup at the moment, which is downstairs as it happens, is a 27-inch BenQ with my 32-inch as the main screen, which is what I work on predominantly. Now I'm connected up here. I'm talking to you at the moment via a 27-inch screen because of my buggered up laptop. And I just think they're great. I mean, the thing is, it's such a nice image you get. With a 4K screen, you get lots and lots of detail. I'm a bit bamboozled by all the color space stuff, but I know my screens have got, I think they show 99% of the Adobe RGB workspace, which is the workspace I tend to use when I'm processing. And happy days. I mean, Kingsley's mentioned some of the other stuff like inputs and outputs and what's downstream and upstream. All that stuff's important. I would like a webcam on my monitors, which is one thing I am missing. But generally speaking, I mean, the listener asked for a particular recommendation. Well, I've got 3 BenQ monitors, which I think is a recommendation in itself, and they seem to be very good value for money. And I'm not an expert, but I just like what I see.
I think one of the other things that you can kind of apply to this is that sort of general rule of technology, which is that if you spend like, I'm not sure how much Will's monitors cost. Mine like I've been really pleased with mine, and it was 350 quid. And I think when you spend double that, you will probably notice less of an improvement than you would from moving from half that. Like, so you know, there's quite a middle ground where you get some really good stuff that's really useful. But like the more you spend, like when you get up into spending thousands, you're talking about the most minute improvements in quality and kind of color rendering and stuff like that. And generally, it's not something that's going to make a whole lot of difference to you.
So I think, can I just ask, we are united in the fact that we agree that curved monitors are to be avoided at all costs.
Well, to be fair, I did test the Philips curved monitor, and to be fair, I enjoyed using it. And of course, you know, we don't see everything. You know, our eye is kind of curved around the back anyway. So when I sat quite close to it, it gave quite a nice view. I mean, you're right. I wouldn't buy one personally, but I wouldn't dismiss them out of hand. I think, like I said, everything, you need to go see the thing, sit in front of it, and see what you like. And if you've got a friendly retailer who'll let you borrow it and take it home and try it, you know, like some of the old hi-fi shops used to, and they've got a demo model and you can try it, then I try it in a home environment, because of course all our lighting conditions vary as well. So
yeah, you know, like things like the viewing angle of the screen are important, although like generally if you look at specs you'll find that doesn't change a whole lot. You know, so kind of you don't need to be sat dead center in front of it. But you know, it's things like the kind of, I mean, even the aesthetics of it are important. Just, you know, is it going to look horrible on your desktop? Like I've gone for one that's just got this really thin black bezel, and like it just looks neat and tidy.
And just one thing to say on monitors, you know, whatever you buy, it's worth getting a calibration device, you know, a data color spider or an X-Rite color monkey or something, and calibrate the thing.
And if you will, get a screen protector.
Yes, and in your case, Kingsley, I suggest you fit them now.
Like, are you coming around?
Well, hopefully, Stephen, that gives you some useful advice. It seems like there's a sweet spot, probably between about 350 and 600 quid in terms of if you want to buy yourself something decent. I was going to ask, actually, very quickly, gents, are you users or fans of hoods over the monitors, and does that make any difference? Will?
Well, with the BenQ screens I had, monitors were supplied. I found I didn't need them in the end, especially because I was using 2 screens side by side. It's kind of, they got in the way in the physical sense.
Yeah.
And I find the way I set up with not much light hitting the screens, I didn't need a shade. But if you've got brighter light, you know, you're in a family environment and somebody's watching the TV and you're trying to edit your pictures, a shade of some sort is not a bad idea. And if you get them included in the screen, great. You know, if it's customized for that particular screen.
What about you, Kingsley? Shade or no shade?
I like Will said, it comes down to the importance, like you know, whether any kind of sun is going to angle across it really. And most monitors now come with like screens that are fairly anti-reflective anyway. And you can probably buy kind of, you know, sort of sheets to put on them to make them even lesser if you want. I mean, I've always been attracted to monitor hoods from a sort of a sci-fi perspective. It looks like you're an alien or something. I've never owned one, and I've never suffered from not owning one. So.
Okay, well, that's probably a path we don't really want to tread too far down, isn't it? Moving on, I think we're nearly done, thankfully. Big sigh of relief for everyone. But Will, we wouldn't end a podcast without a Will's word of wisdom. So what have you got for us this time around?
Well, it relates back to the subject we talked about earlier about photographing plants in situ. And also takes me to my mind back to the days when he used to say, you could tell a good photographer because he got a dirty knee, because they're used to, you know, to get a different viewpoint, you used to kneel down and shoot from low down. But just protect yourself when you're out photographing your plants, and get yourself a pair of knee pads. And it can be the ones you know gardeners might use, which are neoprene, are quite cozy. Or in the case a while ago, I had a pair of real tough ones from I think from Homebase or from B&Q, which I bought when I was putting insulation in a loft, so they could actually help your needs in the comfortable as you were, going across the rafters, laying this stuff down. And I used them for photography for a while. Great. So, knee pads like that, or a sitting mat to rest on, or even a simple bin bag. So just, make your life easy and keep your washing bill down by being protected.
I'd completely concur with that, and add that the waterproof trouser is the friend of the photographer, and will actually will actually have a significant effect on the pictures you take, because as Will says, if you're more likely to get low down and experiment with angles and things. It's like the power of buying a new lens is the effect of the waterproof trousers.
And much cheaper too.
So what you're saying is a comfortable photographer is a better photographer than one who is uncomfortable.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Well, on that bombshell, I think we should end. Thank you very much for your time, gents. I hope everybody's found that useful. We do love to hear from you. So if you've got a question that you'd like to send in, or a general comment, please do send it to podcast@photographynews.co.uk. That's the best way of getting in touch with us. You can also contact us on social, which is @PhotoNewsPN. And we would also love to get some reviews and comments on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So do feel free to give us a review, hopefully 5 stars, or at least 4 maybe. Just so that we can get ourselves bumped up the podcast charts. That would be great. So thank you very much, gents. Thank you very much to contributing editor and soon to be laptop protector, Kingsley Singleton. Thanks, Kingsley.
Thanks. It's been real.
It's been real good. And thanks also to rocket launcher holder and laptop destroyer and PN editor, I suppose. We should probably mention that as well. Will Chung. Thanks, Will.
A pleasure, guys. We'll see you again soon.
We will see you again soon. And in a couple of weeks when we'll be back, we'll be talking a lot more about the Photography News Awards and all the wonderful kit that's won prizes. So we hopefully will speak to you then. Cheers. This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. Enjoy contact-free doorstep pickups which are safe, convenient, fully insured and completely free of charge. Plus, with 250,000 customers and 5 stars on Trustpilot, you can trust them and sleep easy.